Hello thinkers, I'd like to welcome you to my first video blog post for language and modality. We have gone over two separate theories of meaning in language so far. The first is millionism, or the naive theory of meaning, which has been proven false repeatedly by Frege's puzzle. Now the other theory that we've gone over is the descriptivist theory of meaning. This theory says that a speaker associates a certain description with a name, and that a listener will hear that name and associate perhaps the same description with it, and that is how the name has its value. Now, Saul Kripke analyzes these descriptionist theories in his lecture given in 1970 at the University of Princeton, Naming and Necessity, and his lecture is what I would like to talk about today, part one of it. The first thing I'd like to point out is on page 40 of the lecture. Kripke makes a distinction between rigid designators and accidental designators, where a rigid designator would be a description that is put with a name that is true in all possible worlds, and an accidental designator is something that seems true, but when upon further analysis of it is not true because it is not necessarily true. He gives a really good statement, a really good example of this on page 40, which fits perfectly with the world today, seeing that this is written over 30 years ago. He's discussing the number 9, and that two possible descriptions of the number 9 is that it is odd, and that's one, and the other one is that it is the number of planets in our solar system. Now, odd would be a rigid designator in that in all possible worlds we can think of, number 9 has the property of oddness, being an odd number. However, if a speaker uses the word 9 and would associate the description, the number of planets in our solar system, with that number, that would not be a rigid designator, because it is possible that there could be a different number of planets in the solar system. Now this is really an interesting example for us to go over today, because as of August 2006, the International Astronomical Union redefined the definition of planet, and with their new definition, they decided that Pluto is no longer considered a planet in the solar system. So now there are only 8 planets in the solar system. So had someone used the description, number of planets in the solar system, to be associated with 9, that would actually change the value of the number 9, and it would no longer mean what it did, which disproves that part of the descriptionist theory. Now, another more fundamental problem that I found with Kripke's analysis is beginning on page 30 and several other times throughout the lecture. He is talking about proper names, and he is trying to give a description, or he's talking about a description for a name such as Aristotle. Now, in many of his examples, he uses descriptions such as this most famous student of Plato, or the teacher of Alexander the Great. Now, these are things that many people would associate with the name Aristotle. However, this brings up a more fundamental problem, in that if you define Aristotle as the man who taught Alexander the Great, you are left with a new problem of now you have to define who was Alexander the Great. Now, if you add another step and say, oh, well, Alexander the Great was the leader of the Macedonian army, then you'll say, okay, well, what was Macedonia? And you could say, oh, it's a city-state of ancient Greece. Well, then you have to define Greece. And it really brings up a paradox in that anytime you try to use words to describe a name, a lot of times you have another proper name or another specific referent to those words. But those will now require their own description. And it really leads us into a bigger problem of anytime you use words whatsoever, anytime you have to define a word, you must use words to define it. But those words used in the definition may themselves be in need of defining. And so really this could bring up the problem, is it ever possible to write a theory of language or any theory of defining any word, because the words in that theory would then themselves require a definition? I'm interested to see if Kripke brings up this point in his later lectures, but I do not think that he will because he makes common practice of using proper names and definitions, as do other philosophers. I'd be really interested to hear what any other students have to say about this problem, or if it's just something we must accept as a problem with defining a theory of language. Thank you very much.